Hi there. We just wanted to give you guys an update with what's been going on with Global Training Network. It's 4th of July weekend, so
Yeah, it's super hot. It's like for us New Yorkers, it's like 90 degrees, so I'm super hot.
yeah, and pretty humid.
So I'm pretending this is for notes, but it's just so I can actually fan myself. So one of the things we've been wanting to do is talk about Caryn's work with mending the soul and seeing people heal from abuse. But it's always been kind of difficult because there's always very strict confidentiality guidelines. Even to tell stories like, so and so and change the name, we can't even do that. It's just we can't really give any specific details. But we've been wanting to kind of give you an idea of what Caryn's ministry is like and just the amazing things that God has been doing. So what we thought we'd do is I'm going to actually interview my wife, and she doesn't even know what the questions are about her work with mending the soul, and so we can all just kind of get a sense of what she's doing in a way that's appropriate for confidentiality, if that makes sense. So
I hope we didn't plan any trick questions.
no. So, what is the meaning of life? No, just kidding. Okay. When people come to you to do a mending the soul group, what finally leads people to the point where they realize they need healing? What is this journey that brings them to your doorstep?
Oh gosh, there's so many reasons why someone has approached to get involved in mending the soul. I think the primary reason, if I had to just name one, is somebody has heard somebody else's story. Story of healing, really, of a struggle, of their personal testimony in some ways, and it's gotten them curious, and over time, and then they might hear about mending the soul, or they might hear me speak at a church or share in a service or in one-on-one relationships. And the people who share are generally safe. Like they welcome people to come and share their own stories, and so that encourages people for one reason or another to check it out.
So someone is struggling with the effects of abuse, have not shared that, then they hear somebody's story and it kind of gives them encouragement to feel safe enough to tell their story to somebody.
Yeah, but it's more than that. They may not even recognize it as abuse. Sometimes people come because they're having marriage problems. They might recognize that they feel isolated. They might have failed relationships if they're younger and are in dating. So it's not always super concrete that they've experienced.
So that leads to another question then. What are the effects of abuse? When you meet people who start their healing, what are the outward manifestations of having abuse and trauma in their backgrounds? What does that look like? You mentioned just difficulty with relationships. What else?
Yeah.
What different effects?
So abuse, the way it looks in different people, the effects of it looks different to different people. Like, so for some, like for in my own case, it was more of a withdrawing. What had happened to me was broken trust, which that's a characteristic of the effects of abuse, brokenness of trust. And everybody responds differently to that, right? So for me, it was withdrawing to protect myself, and which eventually leads to isolation. And so not knowing what to do about that, and yet getting to a place where I wanted help with feeling isolated, even though I was connected in a lot of other ways. So that might be one.
I know you've mentioned that anger is another one.
Yeah, anger is huge. People, they struggle with anger. That one's kind of hard to. That one's kind of hard to be concrete about because everybody has anger, right?
Right.
So,
but not everybody connects it to the trauma that they've had, right?
Exactly.
And so you help connect that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is that people don't always come in because their trauma was so concrete.
So when people do find healing, what do you think are the factors that lead to people to heal? What's happening in the Mending the Soul group that people start to heal?
Let me just back up one thing about the anger. What happens with anger, I was just thinking about that a little bit more, is people react with anger all the time, but that's because it's a more safe emotion. So what's behind the anger is often hurt. So sometimes somebody who has a lot of anger issues, quote unquote, has a lot to do with accrued hurt
Mm-hmm.
and like a wounded animal, so they lash out all the time to varying degrees. That might look differently for different people.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then,
So now go ahead and
yeah.
ask me that
So
other question.
the question is now, what? So they have anger, they have problems with relationships, all these different issues. Something happens in the men in the soul group that they start to heal.
Yeah.
What are those factors? What would you say are the main components of what you bring them through that starts to facilitate their healing?
The main components.
What?
I think the primary component is that people are welcome the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And in Mending the Soul group, we have what we call our guidelines, and people, by the end of the group, people are like, oh man, the guidelines, yeah. But they're actually principles that protect people when they share in their groups, so that they know that their feelings and their thoughts will be welcome. Because one of the effects of abuse is learning to distrust what you think and what you feel, because it's not either culturally acceptable, especially then if you put it in a Christian culture, it's not very Christian.
Right.
And so the fear of judgment, experiencing judgment, and not just the fear of judgment, all these different things. Or people respond inappropriately when someone does share, so they get this kind of reaction.
Right.
So there's safety. That is the primary reason that is one of the foundational effects of the group.
So the safety in the community becomes a catalyst for healing.
Yeah.
What about content? What are some of the things that you teach that might help them unlearn the things that they've learned?
Well, first what we do is we try to help them identify what actually abuse is. That's a big part of it. What constitutes abuse, what constitutes what the behavior of an abuser is, and there's this thing called the wheel of abuse, where you get to highlight different things that you've experienced. It's in that people start going, oh my gosh, I experienced this.
So confronting the actual abuse and naming it and identifying it is the first step.
Yeah.
And what are some of the spiritual principles that really help bring people along?
Okay, this might sound funny, but one of the biggest principles of healing with abuse in spiritual principles is being honest and being truthful. And my own experience, as many of you guys know, we've shared it publicly, was realizing that even though I thought I was an honest person, I wasn't fully. I mean, I was dishonest. Dishonest to myself, dishonest with God, dishonest with you. And, as part of that self-protection, these things in the back of my head that were not very pretty, and I honestly wasn't always aware of them, but I kept them hidden, because who wants to deal with crap? I mean,
Well, that makes sense, because when things are hidden and when things are dark, they begin to fester. But when you bring them out to light, now we can work on those things and heal them.
Right. So the spiritual principle, one of the primaries, is learning how to be honest about what we think and what we feel, and to say it out loud.
And the interesting thing is from the other end, being a pastor who's had many of the soul groups in my church, I have recognized that people go through the many of the soul groups, they learn emotional, healthy communication, and it really benefits the church, because the church gets much more healthy with respect to our emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And actually one of the things I tell other pastors who are considering having Mending the Soul in their church is that, one of the big benefits is not only just the healing, but the greater degree of emotional health in the church at large, because people learn these principles that apply in any situation of relationship.
Yeah.
So where do people go? So they go through healing, they experience, of course not complete healing, but it takes them a little step on their journey towards healing. And after they are done with the groups, where do they go from there? What happens after that?
Well, that varies. Well, of course, what we encourage them to do is to continue their growth. They have the tools, and that's what we always refer to. Like even now, right now, I'm getting ready to finish up a Zoom Mending the Soul group, and which has been really amazing, even though we all are local. And inevitably, when you get to the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the group, people start saying, what am I going to do without this group? I don't, where else can I share with? And so we start helping them make a plan of what can they do. We of course we refer them to resources like boundaries and safe people. Those I think are both by Cloud and Townsend.
Mm-hmm.
But to be agents of change and start safe communities of their own. We encourage them to go through training to become a facilitator.
And several of your people have become facilitators.
Yeah, a lot of.
How does becoming a facilitator facilitate further healing, either for yourself or some of the other people who have become facilitators?
It just, I like to say it keeps me honest, because as I'm going through the material, as I'm preparing, I'm also connecting with God and asking God, what is He want to show me in this material? And it inevitably new things come up, and so it helps facilitate the connection with God, with ourselves, and with other people. To live in an authentic way.
Yeah, I know you've led lots of groups, obviously, and always over the years I've seen you lead groups. You always take time to go off and prepare before a group. And I would think, well, if it was me, like, you know the material backwards and forwards by now, so why do you still need to prepare for a group? You know the material, right?
Yeah, right. Well, one is I don't have as good a memory as you. That's the truth. But the other reason is healing is a journey. It's not like one and done. It's something, it's just like our own walk with God, right? We're never done growing. So that's true in healing as well. I engage with the material and ask God to show me what He has to show me that might be new. And sometimes He shows me some really surprising things, like how I might be reacting to somebody, or in like even in a work situation, and I go, oh gosh, I was defensive right there, and it's because of X, Y, and Z, and then I can go and make that right.
That's great. Well, one last question. So, you often lead a group, and then you spend some time, I've noticed, with the facilitator, the co-facilitator. What do you guys talk about after the meeting? Why do you do that? What do you talk about?
So we meet after the meetings, either that night or within the week, just to see how the group went. To get feedback from one another, anything that we might need to, like a course correction, any person who we recognize their responses, either they might be struggling in some way or seemed off, and who we need to reach out to during the week. Pray for them, of course, pray for the group, that kind of thing.
Well, there are literally dozens and dozens, if not more, people on Long Island, in New York City, who've experienced healing through Mending the Soul, and largely through, actually completely through the work that you started here. And so we're just so grateful to our partners and to our ministry partners who have, you know, your gifts and your investments and your prayers have really enabled so many people to experience healing. And not only healing, but when we talk about healing, we're not just talking about bringing you back to the state you were before, but you're talking about bringing you beyond that. And so people engaging in mission for the first time, or for the first time with the right motivations. Not to, you know, sometimes we get involved in ministry for unhealthy reasons, and so a lot of people re-engage in ministry for new reasons. And so it's all, we're just so thankful to our partners, and we're grateful for your partnership and investments, and we're so thankful to you. And it's really hot out here, so I think we're going to wrap up. And I'm glad that this is one take video. Caryn didn't know these questions before, but I hope it was encouraging. I wish we could tell specific stories, but we just can't do that. But just know that countless lives have been impacted, and so we're so grateful.
I agree. I just want to say that wholeheartedly the same. Thank you so much. It's been hundreds of lives, and then more so, because then I think of the impact that Mending the Soul has had on me, had on our relationship, which impacts the way that we lead other people. And you guys are partners with us in that. So from the bottom of our heart, we do say thank you.
Yes. And also for those who are interested, I'll be preaching at New Hope Church Westbury. If you go to YouTube, search New Hope Church Westbury. There's like 1,000 New Hope churches. So you have to say Westbury. It's with a U, W-S-T-B-U-R-Y. I'll be preaching at 10. The service is 10:30 Eastern time. So maybe we'll see you there. Comment if you're there, and we'll love to see you.
Yeah.
So have a great weekend.
Bye.